So I think this morning I have heard so much from various speakers and also the discussion from the group. I learned so much. And this afternoon's plenary discussion is going to be another opportunity for us to consolidate some of the things that we've learned in the morning. So I have prepared a couple of questions for each of the panel members. So by now, I think we're probably quite familiar with the panel members, so I won't introduce them another time. And you can also see them, excuse me, and you can read about them on the screen. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions for each of them, and then the floor is all yours. So feel free to ask any kind of questions you have for any of the panel members, and feel free to share your thinking and feedback for all of us. So it's an open floor for discussion. So I would like to kick off by asking Fumi yourself, since you're kind of the very first one to have that vision to set up cultural competency and the unit. Yeah, we can probably share this one as well. Okay. Yeah. And I think the first question I have for you is, were you surprised that kind of it got that far to today, or did you think, I knew it's going to happen like this anyway?
I can't tell you that I knew it was going to happen like this. This was probably the third or fourth thing that I had started, including an organization, including 2 organizations before now. And actually, they're projects of passion about being relevant to events in the world. But as a researcher, I also really enjoy conceptualizing, trying to disrupt, the status quo in terms of bringing in new ideas. On this particular occasion, I needed to do it because I was appointed into a role where I already had an opinion about the context in which I was entering. So from I can't say that as a King's academic I studied at King's, I did my master's and PhD at King's. I don't want to believe I've always been a spectator, no. I've always been involved in one form or the other. And so to have been given a chance to be involved at this level, I didn't want to be a waste of space. I wanted to use it as an opportunity to withdraw the boundaries, to have a debate around some of the things that just seemed, where it seemed we were really stuck in a mode. So at that time, I was not necessarily thinking about whether I would succeed at it or not, but I certainly wanted to test. I wanted to pilot. I wanted to put ideas forward. I wanted to check with the community whether I was a lone mad person, or whether we were, there were many more like me. And the 18-month research showed me that there were many excited people at King's about the vision, but also that there was an amount of frustration about, the ways in which we don't seem to shift the system to move us in that direction. And that was the energy I was using. I hoped that there would be mileage, but I didn't think about the kinds of outcomes that we would have. But the objectives I set offered the potential to get that far. But I just didn't know. As I told you, our provost at the time, Professor Evelyn Welsh, thought that of the 2 core values that we put on the table, cultural competency was the harder one to do. And yet it's become actually I don't want to call it the easy because it's a journey. So it's not that it's easy to do, but we've managed to build a constituency around it, much more than we have the notion of global leadership or global problem solving. So I really don't want to say I knew this will happen. I didn't know for sure. I didn't know for sure.
Thank you. But I think we're absolutely in a better place in comparison when the idea got started, but we still have to recognize, as you rightly pointed out, the journey ahead of us isn't an easy one, isn't it? So then there's the next question, which is related to this, and it also came from one of the colleagues I have spoken with from today. And she was asking, why did you think at the start that Faculty of Arts and Humanities would be the best home for Cultural Competency Unit, which was designed to be outreaching across the college. What made it very special about Arts and Humanities, and how does it kind of enable us to conquer the challenges that we were just talking about?
I should say as well, quite honestly, and I want to be as frank as possible, it wasn't that I singled arts and humanities out. If I compare this to how we started the African Leadership Center, which is also another thing I'd been involved in founding at the time, we gravitated towards where we had like-minded people, where you had some of the most open minds to the idea. In fact, the first institution where King's was close to signing an agreement with in Kenya proved rapidly to not be the right fit. And in that institution, there was one individual that was very excited about the idea and wanted his institution to host it. It took my predecessor, 2 vice principals away before now, to write a very strong letter to say those are not King's values and we'll be pulling out of that partnership. And then we moved to another institution where we had more like-minded people, where one of them had institutional status or stature to accommodate a center like the ALC in Nairobi. This time around, I was consciously in search of where the like-minded people were. Because if you ask what faculties demonstrate the potential to host cultural competency, you can say arts and humanities is a natural home because of the sorts of departments you have. But at the same time, it was not those departments that we thought should be the ones exhibiting, the defense of cultural competency, because it could easily stir into us just doing languages, doing, the kinds of things we know to do traditionally. But you wanted in those departments to be real champions because they're thinking, they have an interdisciplinary mindset and so on. And I think there were 1 or 2 such people. But amongst the executive deans, amongst the 9 executive deans of the time, of course, people have changed in that office, Marion was very open-minded to the idea. And when people open their minds to ideas, it's because they have also been thinking about similar things. The notion of global cultures was somewhere in her head, and she was figuring it. So we had several lunches. We sat down just really thinking about what this will mean, because any faculty that hosts such a thing on behalf of the institution would have a burden. The first, maybe 2 interrelated burdens. The first one is being able to persuade their colleagues internally that this is not just ours. It belongs to the entire institution. And we're trying to use it to shape developments in the institution. The second burden they will have is to persuade their colleagues from other faculties that we're not going to do this to it. We will open up and make it accessible to everyone else. And I think because you yourself you were already a champion of this idea in your own right, doing this in another faculty, having you come to arts and humanities to work with another colleague, initially to co-lead this, and having Marion accept that and persuade her colleagues that this was the direction of travel was already a big, big thing. So I think it was the leadership of the faculty that made that possible. And I wasn't looking at which faculty was most attractive for it. It could have been yours, for example, but I don't think there would have been such an open door in your faculty as it was in arts and humanities. So it's not straightforward, but I don't think, I think that was the path to it, really.
Thank you. I think I can also reflect on that based on my own experience working across 2 faculties. If we did have the kind of cultural competency, for example, in the health faculties, we wouldn't have that kind of opportunity to have the cross-disciplinary exchange. And I've been telling my colleagues, some of them are sitting among us, that I learned so much from them, and they give me something that I have never thought about cultural competency. I think that's the kind of the beauty of that. And I also went back to what, Zhuhua, you were saying about the importance of the leadership to enable that to happen. And during the lunch, we're also saying putting the resource in the right place. So it's a combination of the kind of the right leadership, the right people, right initiatives combined together. And I have to say, we're quite lucky at King's to have that kind of opportunity to make what's happening today. Thank you very much. So on that note, can I just kind of invite Zhuhua to kind of reflect on some of the questions. You're a world-leading scholar in intercultural studies, and there's a clear synergy between cultural competency and intercultural competence studies. And many universities have started developing cultural competency or intercultural programs. And most of them, including King's, are just at the kind of early stage of our development. So what do you think are the common challenges facing these universities, and how can these universities collaborate effectively to achieve social justice and equality instead of competing with each other?
Thank you. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think first of all, I really want to say it again. I learned so much from the conversation with everybody here, and also very much inspired by what you are doing here, coming from UCL. And there's lots of food for thought and things we can do definitely to learn from you and work together very closely. So going back to your question, so yes, intercultural communication studies. There are quite a few universities in UK are now offering degree, master degree, usually as a master degree level, intercultural communication studies. They usually attach most of them. I actually did a piece of work with two other colleagues a while ago, looking at who offer intercultural communication studies and by which university. There are quite a few. I was involved in setting up two of them very early at the start of these intercultural communication courses. One was in Newcastle, and then the other one was set up in Birkbeck, where I was actually heading up, head of applied linguistics in Birkbeck. So there are interest in intercultural communication, but I have to say the kind of depth and vision people put into it. King's Cultural Unit is one of the very first one I have seen in a sense of putting in so much imaginary and a very much actually visionary thinking behind this. And also I really like the way you actually thinking about this is very much interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary project. And also it's about, what you have put there is actually about people, about winning hearts and mind. I think that's really important. So the challenges facing by university, I think it just really think about, it's about the system. So how do we actually make sure what we are doing here, the conversation we have, the effort we have put in, and the courses credit we have taken can be recognized at institutional level and outside. At institutional level, I think quite a lot of focus are on REF, for example, because that's obviously linked with QR quality research money. So there is a funding coming from the REF, and it's also very much actually to do with the ranking, what people can say on the website, to put it bluntly. And also TAF, Teaching Excellence Framework, and other more sort of measured, people recognize the measure. I think, Fumi, you mentioned earlier, and also about international ranking. For example, QS international ranking, there is actually clear measure looking at the number of output, the collaboration, co-authorship, and what the reputation, so on and so forth. So how can we get our work around the cultural competence or intercultural communication recognized and reflected in these kind of a most system recognized measure. And I think that's a challenge. You may want to argue, we probably don't really want to get engaged in that, but the danger of not engaging with that, actually, our work is not recognized in those. And then it's kind of making it challenging for our workload recognized, time recognized. The conversation we have today is actually, I think people here have to try to find a gap in the diary, trying to come here. But wouldn't be nice it is a part of our sort of schedule rather than something we have to create. So system-led changes that's actually need to happen, and recognition, that's actually, I think that will be main challenge. Second, I think in terms of thinking beyond what we are doing in the classroom is to think what we can do to the society. That's, I mentioned earlier, I think the practice bit, the relevance to society has been the driving founding principle underlying intercultural studies. And I think that should be a very strong connectivity that we need to think about. What we're doing, what's the relevance to the society? It's not something we are good at as university. We're good at creating academic debates, but then we also need to think about what we are good for the society good, and having that bigger picture. And I think one of the colleagues asking, I think it's actually coming from our lovely student from Medical Cultural Society, talking about why we're talking about peace, politics, and war. And I think that's exactly the value, one of the value we actually need to recognize from the intercultural studies. We have a currency. We are relevant to what's going on outside there. Just looking at, all the news on the daily basis, I really can see close link about what we're doing here to what's happening there at politics, on the front line when there is a war going on, and how intercultural scholars can contribute to the conversation about reconciliation, language, the role of language and culture in conflict resolution, and also diversity. And yesterday, I think there was a hearing about COVID, and this lack of diversity in the decision-making process. There is a female advisor, and she was talking about her voice was drowned out, not heard at all in the decision-making process, because the rest of the team are all men, and she was actually making case for family domestic abuse, and that wasn't really taken into consideration. And then as a consequence, it sounds really scary and dark when she said women died because of that. So our work has impact on life and death, and also talking to the medical colleagues here, all the decisions that involve culture is not just about culture, but has impact on people's life and death. So how important we are, I think we actually need to make case to society and recognize our value to the contribution to what can do for the society. So that's a second challenge. So a bit about advocacy and a bit of sort of awareness raising of importance of our work. So that's perhaps the second challenge. And I'm going to stop here. I can come back to it later if we have time.
Thank you very much, Zhuhua, for that very visionary kind of a talk, which laid out very clearly where the unit like cultural competency, or whatever people are going to call it, is driving towards. And as a kind of a new department, can I just follow up with one question? It's probably a bit selfish one, because I'm just thinking we're quite new at the very start. And we're very lucky to have the senior management to support and the resource, etc. And you have heard much about what we do here. If there's one thing that you think we should do differently from your perspective, because you have lots of experience setting up programs, etc. So if there's one thing you think we should do differently, what that might be?
It's a difficult one.
I'm sorry to be difficult. Maybe the cough.
I mean, it's not really something you should sort of doing differently, but I think it's a question of doing a bit more. You have a very good start, have a good, alliance here, people from different discipline. And I was thinking about, in our discussion, I'm thinking about the question about research method, and you actually talk about what exactly we can do differently. I think that's very good question. And my, when you was talking about that, I was thinking about, how can we demonstrate the importance of researching intercultural, the importance of researching interculturally and teaching interculturally, working interculturally, practicing interculturally. And if we can demonstrate value, added value, it's not just actually, knowing this good, but the added value of researching, teaching, working, practicing interculturally, and then related to colleagues and our students and professional service staff, and all these different parts of a workforce, like make university so what it is. And that's actually will be the winning formula. So it's not something you will do different, but a bit, it's a question of a bit more and better. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think that's also put a very heavy point on the resource, isn't it? If we have the kind of resource, we'll be able to expand and do what's really important to help this agenda. Thank you very much. I'm sure colleagues may well brewing kind of ideas and questions that we may come back to some of the topics a bit later. Can I just kind of move on to Dr. Edward Admolu? So you are one of the first full-time faculty members at Cultural Competency Unit. We're delighted to have you and your expertise, and you've been amazing in the last 1 year, I think, in the post. But when you started, I know that you did have some apprehensions of the concept of cultural competency. What the hell is it? What am I going to do here? And so on. But things have changed over this 1 year, and you developed this very successful level 5 with Alice Hazard. And and you're actively involved in this journey, in this debate. So could you just share us what's changed since?
Well, first and foremost, I admire my colleagues who are able to speak unrestrictedly from the top of their heads. I've prepared what looks like a film script. So, buckle up. So it's good that I'm the last one here.
Welcome to the club.
So I've interpreted your question in 2 parts. First, I want to share what those initial apprehensions were, and then what has changed. So I've got 4 apprehensions. I had many more, but I had to think about the time. So without sounding hyperbolic, when I first became aware of the Cultural Competency Unit and this new audacious initiative to roll out cultural competency across the college, I personally considered it to be rather revolutionary, if not a rebellious act, in terms of disrupting the status quo, the conventions of what is traditionally taught at King's and what is perhaps valued as important in other competing institutions. However, it was this same newness, this novelty of cultural competency, which initially attracted me, but also equally left me slightly apprehensive, given that there was no historical precedent, no reference from which to evaluate its past or eventual success at King's. So I felt like I was taking some sort of irrational leap of faith into the unknown. So that's my first one. So my second apprehension was when I joined the unit, I was charged with the responsibility of developing and teaching a suite of elective cross-faculty modules available to all undergraduate students. So that's daunting in and of itself, regardless of their disciplinary background. So the first being the professionalism and practice module that I spoke about earlier. And here lies the apprehension. I couldn't fathom how to design what I considered a one-size-fits-all module that had a certain generality or genericness that spoke to and which accommodated the diverse disciplinary backgrounds and subject specialisms of all students. So I didn't want something that was too general as to have students question the relevance or legitimacy of cultural competency, but also not too specific as to cater to a select few students while putting others off. Number 3. So while I was incredibly happy to be offered this lectureship as part of this unit, especially given the ridiculously competitive academic markets, I'm very happy to be here. I had this niggling doubt at the back of my head about my status as some sort of expert or specialist in cultural competency, given my background in international development. So I deal with poverty and inequality and how to address that. And there are some synergies with cultural competency. However, it still induced a sense of imposter syndrome more than I already had in the academic space, as I felt I couldn't offer anything meaningful or substantive to the design and development of modules. But also I didn't want my students to query my intellectual authority to impart knowledge about something that I'm still trying to understand myself every day. The 4th and the last one. So recently, there's been a lot of popular discourse and political debates. I would say scaremongering or perhaps attacks over the role of universities as factories notorious for pumping out graduates brainwashed by left-wing ideologies of so-called Mickey Mouse or woke courses, and calling for a strong crackdown on this. We've seen this as it relates to subjects like critical race theory in Northern America, but also Black studies here in the UK at Birmingham City University. I felt that cultural competency could be perceived by others as falling into this trap. Therefore, adding the fuel of resistance from our colleagues in certain faculties across the college. And admittedly, there were 1 or 2 faculties, and who shall remain nameless, that were and still are stubbornly resistant to the idea of cultural competency, yet alone offering it as an option for their students to take. So those are the apprehensions. So how did I overcome this? How did it change? So regarding my apprehensions over not having a historical reference or record of achievement, I've come to realize that not every initiative, particularly those that are the first, like the Cultural Competency Unit, will have a blueprint from which to gauge or pinpoint the trajectory or lack thereof for success. But also I've come to realize, and now this is going to sound like a therapy talk here, I had to let loose and surrender to the process, right? Which has been an adjustment for me, especially someone who likes to have a level of control and certainty over their life. I also had to trust and subscribe to the broader and long-term strategic vision of the unit. But also, regarding my apprehensions around the content of the modules and meeting the needs of all the students, look, the high enrollment numbers of students taking cultural competency and their positive reception and feedback are both indicators that we're doing something right. Of course, these students have given suggestions on how to improve and adapt our content, which is always welcomed and encouraged, but I would say their enthusiasm is nonetheless palpable and removed any of my hesitations or doubts. And regarding my status as an expert or specialist, as part of the teaching team, Shong Yu has encouraged us to tell students that cultural competency is an ever-growing concept and practice. And this is something I've learned myself as well, which means we all have something meaningful to contribute and to say. As such, working in collaboration with colleagues from different disciplinary backgrounds in developing modules has helped me understand that cultural competency has a certain malleability to it, in the sense that it has many entry points from which to interpret how it can be understood, practiced, and applied in various contexts, which has allowed me to pull from my own knowledge base, but also find my feet in the field. But lastly, with regard to the naysayers and the detractors of cultural competency, to put simply, haters are going to hate, right? We can't win everyone over, Not every person will share or subscribe to the same vision that we have, but that shouldn't deter us from forging ahead as a unit and actualizing what we set out to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Edward. That's an amazing journey that he has described, and also really reconfirms that you brought in that kind of aptitudes that will make this program successful. So thank you very much on that. So you probably know that you won't be surprised. A lot of colleagues sitting here and those who were here earlier would want to know if they were to get into this field. I'm sure lots of them will come in with the same apprehensions. What sort of advice would you give people?
I would say, just as I was saying before, just realizing that there is no universally agreed understanding or definition of cultural competency. and there's a certain malleability to it, meaning it can be applied to various contexts and professionalisms. So I would say that you can bring or utilize something from your substantive, disciplinary, or research background to this ever evolving understanding of cultural competency.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is open. Do we have any questions from our colleagues and students for our panel members here? Do we have another microphone down there, or do we have to share one of these? Okay, I'll pass this among the colleagues here. I can stand up so I can see hands. Or any feedback and reflections people would like to share?
Oh yeah, thanks everyone. It's been a tremendous day. I just had a question about or maybe a comment, maybe something to reflect upon. But I think it's on the point that we kind of ended with here of this idea of the malleability of the idea of cultural competency and the need to bring in the kind of the local expertise and the personal experience of it. And to me, that seems like a kind of a fundamental challenge for setting up the cultural competencies unit, for setting up structures around that, for setting up modules around it. I just wanted to hear some reflections on how to get around that, how to deal with the indeterminacy of culture and how we think about culture.
I'm wondering whether not necessarily. For me, would you like to start?
No, thank you. And I think you've just raised a really vital point. That's where I think it is possible to just get into a slippery slope around cultural competency. I actually think it's one of the challenges we all face, because if you're using this institutionally, is it about culture in a way that is so rigidly defined for the institution? Or is it the culture of the collective that recognizes the collectivity of people in the institution along the lines of, if you like, personal identities, national or societal origins, disciplines, and towards what end? And I think that this is a very vital point, because if we don't agree on the purpose of what this is for in the institution and then frame it accordingly, we might just slide indefinitely into that space where culture evolves and it can be everything and in the end nothing at all. And I think that's where the support that we give centrally, by constantly helping to frame the context for the institution, first in terms of how our communities are changing, but also how the problems we're trying to solve in the world can be better served by the ways in which we see the interconnectedness of these multiple identities, especially disciplines in this case as well, in solving those problems. So if we don't frame it in the institution, we can just have an endless, I think that's a fantastic question. And that's the thing we need to develop consciousness around. Thank you. I mean, does that?
Oh yeah, I think that's. I think that's tremendous. But it's the awareness and the constant shifting awareness, and particularly I think the point of saying that you think about the institution's values, and then but it becomes this kind of recursive thing, because you were saying there's a culture of thinking about culture.
Yes.
And that begins to propagate amongst itself.
Perfectly framed. Please don't forget that the culture of thinking about culture, because that's a challenge in the institution, that we cannot be in a place where we've sat down and it's all fixed now. We've sorted it. We're culturally competent. It doesn't work that way. There's an evolution to this, but framing it in terms of the purpose of it for the institution and how we use that to not just to manage the relationships across the institution, but use it to serve the purpose of the moment, which might be different day after tomorrow, right? Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you. And I also wanted to add to that by saying that when we started building the awareness of cultural competency, or the kind of awareness of the existence of the unit, for me, Marian took me and Ben Schofield, another very dear colleague of mine, to different faculties to have lots of conversations there. I think that kind of conversations are very important. And I think your question just gives me a very good reminder. Perhaps we need to do that kind of conversations continuously to allow this kind of a high level, but down to the kind of a, at different levels of the colleagues can get involved in talking about the culture and getting the kind of a, if not consensus, but the opportunity to understand that we are thinking about culture as part of the culture, if you like. Yeah, thank you. Do we have any other questions? There's Mike.
Thanks very much. It's really very interesting to hear all this. Last year I worked a bit with Nick and in CMCI and with his work that he'd done with the Horizon Europe project. Part of that was cultures of care. And I just wondered if anybody could talk to that a little bit, because I think that's really essential in today's world. It's also essential in HE because that's what we are often lacking in higher education. It seems to become a very difficult area. But care, care of bodies, care of minds, care of our world. So it's on lots of levels. Just wonder if that could be addressed at all.
Thank you very much, Anne, for the question. I'm wondering whether any of the panel members would like to pick it up first.
Maybe I can start. Thank you. I missed which department you're working at.
Okay, so I'm this is CMCI, so that's cultural media and creative.
Okay, thank you.
My background is in dance and cultural engagement.
Right,
So
okay.
I'm a professor of dance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's a really important question. The culture of care. I actually has been working on it very recently. So it's just very much actually on the my thinking is really looking at the culture of care and how language, the role of language and embodiment play in demonstrating culture of care. And related, I think, to our discussion on cultural competency, I think it came out in today's discussion is the effective dimension of intercultural relationship. Lots of time we think it's about people. It's really about the relationship, and it's not about what people say. It's about how people say, how people feel. So that's actually effective aspect of intercultural interaction is actually really a new area that's actually we need to look into, prioritize a bit more, and drawing in particular from the cultural studies, looking at the creativity, intercultural creativity, to look at how we express emotions, how we embody care, how we embody these relationships through the way we do practice. And because I have a background in languages, so I'm more interested in languaging, translanguaging. So how people use language and different semiotic signs and resources to express, to communicate with each other. So that's, I think that's just some thought to your question. I don't know anybody else.
Thank you. So I want to speak to what you said, but not specifically about the care aspects, but it relates to it. So before we were just mentioning how culture and cultural competency is always shifting and evolving. But then I also realized that we tend to frame it, especially within institutions, as the unique and defining cultural characteristics of a community or belonging. But I think we should open up and see culture also as disciplinary cultures, institutional cultures, organizational cultures, and the cultures of care as well. That's something that we need to consider. And perhaps we can think of a module around that. Very nice.
Yeah. May I just add? Thanks. May I just add to that bit? Because this is amazing. It's the first time we've done this. We probably need to use this as an instrument to have, a regular conversation across. Maybe a conference. Because I think you're speaking powerfully to the question, we need to question our methodologies as well. We've come from a culture in the social science where even now, were we not having those conversations around decolonizing, right? We will still take as sacrosanct the idea that emotions, feelings, care, all those things do not come into, the research that we do in our social environment. And we talk about bias as if it's a disease, right? When actually accepting, understanding that there's a context. It's not just a cultural context, but you were talking about culture of relationships. But if we're talking about care of our bodies, right? Care of our minds, and we do not draw that into the methodology that underpins even the research that we do across different spaces, what are we saying about the validity of the knowledge that we produce? And ultimately, it affects how you fund, what you fund, how you fund, and how you allow research to take, its natural course, right? Because this is brought into our methodological frame in the first instance. I think there's so much to really rethink as far as I'm concerned, so that this question does not then narrowly fall into one disciplinary area. It's not for us. We do this other thing. But the question of care is only for this kind of people. But it's for everyone, right? Very interesting, actually. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I feel I must pick on that as well, given that I have a background in medical education.
Yeah.
And the caring for the patient is kind of an optimal goal for everything we do and we teach to medical students. And in that systematic literature review, both of them actually, I talked about early in the morning, and we put care pretty much at the center of all the discussions. And in my own experience in terms of teaching, developing cultural competency and getting people on board, if you talk about self-care, then everybody can relate to it, because everybody at some point needs to be cared for. And that's the starting point of building empathy and building the awareness that we need to care also for others, because that's what we want. So I think it's absolutely a very important element in it. And I think just reflecting on the discussion early in the morning after Zhuhua's presentation, we need to have more tools, methodologies to help us understand how the feelings, emotions are coming into play, and how we can capture the impact of a cultural competency research and training on enabling the feelings, emotions, and other things that we kind of overlooked in the past. But care really brings everything to life. The reason I like the word cultural competency is because it directs towards delivery, doing, caring. Without that, any kind of a culture, and I said that sets apart from some of the culture studies. So we just don't want to stay on knowing about it, but we want to do something about it.
I do think that
Maybe use the microphone so we can capture it.
I may just come back to you because that's really helpful. Working with young people, maybe part of this cultural competency, to use the dreaded word resilient, but building resilience, building, toolkits for resilience, because, what the young people are meeting in today's world is quite horrifying, on every level, socially, emotionally, etc. And I don't know whether this is part of the cultural competency education, but I think that kind of idea of resilience and putting toolkits in place would be very helpful. So I think all our experience working with young people is how difficult things are and how difficult it is to cope.
Absolutely. I think we're very open to that kind of a conversation. I would very much to pick your brain on that. I think one of the sessions we have is on vulnerability, and that relates very closely to resilience.
Yes, and for me, because it's come from the world of practice and dance and performance and cultural engagement in that way, I think there's toolkits and things that could be part of that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of working with arts and humanities, isn't it? That's why I have to travel all the way from medical school to ANH. Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? I think we may still have a few minutes. Oh, yes.
Hi. So it has been wonderful to listen to everyone, and not just because of the coffee and the food, also because of everything everyone has said. I think for me, just sitting here, we've seen how cultural competency as a personal skill, as an academic discipline, but this is the cultural competency unit. So it suggests that it's cultural competency, but also from an institutional perspective. And therein lies my question. Oftentimes institutions are by nature, they tend to uphold the status quo. The logic of institutions is to uphold a certain status quo. Whether we agree with it or not, that's another matter. And they tend to be conservative by definition, because once there's an institutional logic, that logic tends to be reproduced. So my question is the following. If we accept cultural competency as something that's shifting, as something that's not fully defined, as something that's maybe more of a conversation, how can we then translate that into a cultural competent institution? So, yeah. I've been wondering about it. So if any of you, you're all, much wiser than me. Yeah.
Maybe Fumi would like to. Oh, you'll speak fast. Oh gosh, I thought I can hide behind that, and I got kind of avoided that. I'll try to pick that up. I think that's a very challenging question. I think firstly, our mission is really to set cultural competency unit up not as a conventional academic department which kind of preaches a subject matter and claims the expertise in certain area, but rather we want to create a culture of collaboration and co-creation. And we want to create a methodology. I like the word methodology rather than methods, because it's kind of higher up. You have a bit of thoughts behind the tools. So we want to have that methodology that brings true interdisciplinary approaches into it. So we don't claim, oh, I'm social scientist, so I don't look at the stats, or I look at the stats, so I don't look at humans. We take a pragmatic approach to it so that we make sure we look at the real problems, and we're a platform to bring the experts of different methodologies coming together to help us look into the problem. I think that's the kind of the first thing we need to achieve. And then once with that kind of a methodology, we're hoping we can generate more data, if you like the terrible word. It may not be the right word, but I think people just love data and evidence. At least we can provide a more evidence-based understanding of the situation. What it is, how can we make it different? I think going back to Zhu Hua's talk early in the morning is that we need more research into this. But we cannot just get any research. We need to think about our methodology first. Because if you get the wrong tools, you can never get the right answer. And I think that's the kind of a challenge I have been putting forward for my colleagues and myself to think about what is the best way for us to understand what exactly it is. So that's the starting point. In terms of changing the institutional culture, hopefully, once we get more evidence, we get more publications, we're speaking towards the conventional higher education culture, as Zhu Hua was saying, we're refable, we're testable, whatever we want, you name it, we have it. If we get to that stage, I think there will be more power in the discourse that we're portraying. And thirdly, I think it's the continuous leaderships. I think Fumi is here with us. I think that's really a good starting point, and Marion and so on. So hopefully we'll have the continuous support to have open conversations with the colleagues. So I am thinking about an annual conference or even biannual conference in collaboration with perhaps even UCL and other institutions, so that we can bring like-minded, interested, curious people on board. There's always some people, as I think Edward rightly pointed out, you can never win, and we have to live with that. I think that's part of the cultural competency. But slowly, hopefully, people will begin to engage with the conversation, not so much being convinced by us, but they would like to talk to us. I think that's the kind of a key thing. So the continuous conversation through the continuous senior leadership support, I think, are the kind of the key things I have in mind. So on that note, I think I'm going to pass it on to other colleagues.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. It's a big challenge. It's the core of the issue, because if this started from an institutional level, and we're trying to frame this, and we have a unit that is doing the sort of things that we're saying, and in a constantly changing environment. The question I want to add to that is, how would we know when we're beginning to make a difference in this area? And this goes back to your point earlier about recognition and the rankings. Ultimately, as a group of people, as a network, but also as an institution, we want to be at that place where somehow we have affected the ways in which people look at not just cultural competency, but the results that cultural competency achieves in our own individual and collective outcomes. And what we do and show that we do will become the measures. It means that we're influencing also the institutions that are thinking about this. We've gotten it into, and I agree with you, it's not about the rankings, but it's about influencing, using those ranking structures to influence the ways in which people change. So I am not thinking rigidly within one institutional framing, but the idea that we institutionalize some approaches or methodologies, if you like, that will allow us get to where we want to get to, and it becomes actually part of the practice, not just of rankings, but of doing and of seeing change happen.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and then this is about the future, really, about this cultural competency unit. So while we are talking about, how do we measure the success of this unit? I think that's usually leadership question, isn't it? How do you measure the success? What will be the deliverable, and what's the theory for change? How do you actually? So I'm thinking about really, how do we demonstrate the reach of the significance of our project, and I think again going back to people, I think people is really the core, the really important part of this project. How can we actually change people's behavior and practice? And sometimes it's easy to measure in the in questionnaires sometimes, but some of the things we are doing maybe not be able to pick up by the number. How satisfied are you? Tell us out of 5, that kind of question. So some of the subjective question, how do we measure these success? And I think some of the people earlier we talk about by telling success stories, and your testimony just now is so powerful. Our life trajectories, how we work together, and how we cross the border and then find each other and work collaboratively together and effectively. And so that kind of success story will be useful, powerful testimony of the success of this unit. So that's one. And going back to the notion of the people, and I think this, everyone going through the cultural competence unit training, you have access to, who these people are, the staff, students who have connected with you. So it will be really interesting to see how they become a multiplier in sort of transmitting the message and then passing on the baton, as it were. How do we actually, each one of us, people sitting in this room, become agent of change? And I think only actually we sort of focus on people, using people-focused approach to institute the change, and that change can be sustainable. So really thinking about, what we have talked about, leadership and nurturing the talent, young talent from very early on. So we have the pipeline starting from undergraduate, that's great, but looking through undergraduate, master, PhD students, and going out to school even, if we have outreach project and resources going into outreach, and then thinking about this as a pipeline and going to the society. That's actually people-focused and starting early approach. I think that will be great intervention.
Okay. I'll think of something. So I think comparatively compared to Fumi and Shongyu, I'm not like on the shop floor. So, which is fine. It's okay. However, I have been given some strategic roles, so perhaps I can speak to that. So I am co-leading with Shongyu the research agenda, our strategy, and postgraduate research. And I've become increasingly aware that our choice and strategy could end up ventriloquizing or replicating certain norms or values within the institution in terms of what is important or significant or what should be prioritized in terms of research. But I'm also aware that Shongyu and others are open to having a conversation that we can prioritize other aspects of research that we see or deem as important in the context of cultural competency. And that's all I have. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for the amazing questions. We're kind of running out of time. How time flies. I'd like to kind of invite everybody to join me to thank all the panel members for today's excellent discussion and contribution. Thank you very much. And also a round of applause for everyone for being till the end of the day and contributing to the very important discussion. And thank you so much. Shall we just give us a round of applause as well? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure. And absolutely. And my team members, so thank you so much for being here. And our student helper, who's been here very early on. You're probably one of the first here today.
Yes, and I've been listening to you. I know we're all rushing, but I've been listening to you with so much gratitude. My name is Alina. I'm a final year law student. And when Professor Olonisakin was the first one I heard when I arrived at King's. During our welcome week, she wished us students the joy of being and knowing ourselves. Oh, wow. Someone listened to that.
Yeah. That's the influence impact.
And I'd like to say that it was through cultural competency that I discovered who I was while I was at King's. I arrived here with excitement that was only equaled by my nervousness. I came with many variants of who I was. Like Professor Olonisakin used to write, I too walked many bridges before my academic journey here. I came as a mature, low-income cancer survivor student. And Professor Olonisakin basically suggested in her speech that the place in which I'll fit will not exist until I leave. And beyond, coming to King's, I discovered that beyond its academic resources, beyond its research facilities, it was the people that presented the university's most important treasure. And by participating in the Kickstarter, by having the privilege to be recruited by Professor Edward and Chang-Yu to work with them, and with Pula in the cultural competency student group, by being a member of King's 100, it was in all these places, under the guidance of university leadership and my own professors, that I discovered that there are as many kings as there are students. There are as many definitions of culture and cultural competence as there are students. And yet, at the same time, ironically, there is only one king. And to answer, I thought about your present questions. There is this paradox at King's too between tradition and innovation, between a unit, a set framework, institutionally speaking, and the room for creativity. I think through every student who comes to it, and every professor like you, and every staff member who tries to find their own versions while helping us students to find our own empowering versions. This is the answer to your question. This bridge, this balance, this walk by each of us separately, but because of a concept like cultural competency, we also walk it together. And I would just like to express my gratitude to each of you for simply the fact that you exist. Because I exist because of your efforts. And I'm very grateful that my story has been written by you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very touching testimony. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing that kind of a journey. I was hoping that I think you're on camera, definitely. And I wish that we could just kind of use that as a testimony to a success story. Definitely. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes. And we actually also have two students from medical school. I think you guys have just established a new society, isn't it, from the medical school? Would you like to say something about it since we are kind of open up now? Maybe take the microphone up there. Yeah.
Make sure the switch is up. It's unmuted.
Oh, make sure it's unmuted.
Oh, okay. Hello. Yeah. Hi, I'm Nav, and this is
Hero.
and we are the founders of Medical Cultural Competency Society. So we're quite new. We just in our probably 4th month now. So we're very lucky that the hero actually emailed Shuang Yu, and he informed us that just as we were trying to think of something, Kings was also trying to think of starting the launch for the whole of Kings. So we knew this about 2-3 weeks ago, and we're very lucky to come and see how Kings as an institution is trying to make the institution more culturally competent. And our main sort of driving force is trying to integrate what the faculty and the staff are doing with what the students want to do as well, and trying to make sure that there's cultural competency is not just something that faculty says to the students that you should do this, but it's something where faculty and students are learning at the same time to try and facilitate that, and particularly from a medical standpoint.
Yeah, I think coming today, there's just a lot of reflections that I had, and one of them was particularly cross faculty, because we were, I think, very centered in medicine and how it affects patients and healthcare, but actually learning from so many different people today about just day-to-day social interactions has really, I think, engaged my mind, at least, as to how we can improve our society and what sort of messages we want to tell us other students and stuff. So yeah, it's been really good.
And thank you, everyone. It's great.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that's a very successful story that the students are taking on board and really infiltrating into the system by engaging firstly the students' body and then the faculty members. So I think we would really want to see more of that kind of societies developed. And I personally am very keen to support you guys to showcase your success as you grow as a mature, a bigger community. So congratulations on setting that up and all the best.